Does your horse do this? Walk away when he should be standing still? Stick around and watch while we work on this young horse to stop that tendency that you see right there.
So I thought what I'd do, she's not going to be doing a walk-off all the time. So when she's not walking off, I have a few notes here, which I rarely use, because I'd like to reflect as we have a little downtime waiting for her to do bad things on some changes that we've seen. See, there she goes. And I'm going to sort of let her get away with that a little bit, and then we'll have something more to deal with because I'm almost encouraging it. What I'd like to talk about a little bit is where we live. We live in York County, Pennsylvania. We're in south central Pennsylvania. We're about 40 miles north of Baltimore, but more importantly, we are across the Susquehanna River from Lancaster County, which is the heartland of the Pennsylvania Dutch. Lancaster County, Berks County, Lebanon County, York County, that's pretty much Dutch country. Dutch, for those of you who are not from around here, or as the Dutch folks would say, if you're from off, Dutch doesn't mean wooden shoes. Dutch means Deutsch, which is the German word for German. So you could say it's Pennsylvania Deutsch. And that's where the Dutch comes from. It is a derivation of German. And we have an Amish blacksmith at this point who I've gotten real well acquainted with. And he took me back in time to when I was growing up because he speaks to his brothers and to his wife often in Pennsylvania Dutch. Growing up in the 50s and 60s here in York County, less so than in Lancaster, but not infrequently, there are people you would hear conversing in Dutch all the time. And I had friends whose grandparents, no longer their parents, but their grandparents, spoke only Dutch, did not speak English, period. And that has radically changed. And in fact, among what the Amish call the English people, those of us who speak English, regardless of our ethnic background, among us English folk, we're speaking strictly the nearest thing to English we can manage. We're not really using the Dutch words, or certainly not whole Dutch conversations. And I thought I'd look back in time, but while I'm doing that, I'm also going to take advantage of her doing bad things to fix her. So she may not do anything bad, and then I'll just have a little speech on our local culture. But see, she's walking away. What do you do? If the horse is troubled, I'll bend them down till they relax, until they stop. Take that walk out of them, bend them around until they slow down and stop, then release them. If they walk away again, you bend them down again, if they're troubled. But let's suppose that she's not really troubled, she just wants to go somewhere. She just wants to walk away from where you are. Well, that's disobedience. So I'm going to be more direct, and I'm going to say nope, and I'm going to be crude and pull her back. Then I'm going to release her and invite her to walk off. She is what, to get back to the Pennsylvania Dutch, there are a lot of words that became part of the language that we don't hear as much anymore, but she's Shushly. Shushly is the word that the Dutch would use to describe somebody who was antsy, that was moving around, that was restless. So she's definitely Shushly. She's also, in a horse sense, doing something very much like kids would do when they move around in their seats. The Dutch folk would say, well, they're rooching around. Well, you don't hear that anymore, but it's a great word. So when she gets antsy, when she gets Shushly, pretty quick she gets to rooching around as well. So those are a couple of words, and I just made some notes because it's hard to remember them all. Now, suppose in addition to being Shushly and rooching around, she was not real coordinated. And I rode her around and she wanted to stumble over herself. We've all had horses like that. Well, in Pennsylvania Dutch parlance, that's a horse or a person that's doppy. And that's, again, a great description. If you're tripping over your own feet, she's thinking. If you're tripping over your own feet, you're doppy. So worst thing in the world is to be reaching around and you're too doppy to even do it right. Now, if you find this hard to follow, it could be, I say crudely pull her back, then just let her go. It could be that you're verhutzt, because verhutzt is a word for confused. You know, he was all verhutzt. And they sort of have that accent. Oh, he was all verhutzt. He didn't know where he was going. He was all verhutzt. If you're really verhutzt, you might even cross the line and be verhuddled too. And that's one step worse, being verhuddled. And suppose you were too verhutzt to know how to turn off your lights in your house. You didn't know where the switches were. You were all verhutzt. Well, you wouldn't know how to out the lights. Because that's what would be said. You didn't turn the lights out, you outed them. And so often, the way that it was said is almost better than the way it's properly said. Because why do you have to say, turn the lights out, when you could just outen them? So, if we're not outing in lights, maybe we're out in the barnyard and we got some little pigs. My son-in-law is standing up here, he used to have little pigs. And little pig is a woods. And that's a baby pig or a young pig is a woods. And if a child eats, well, I'll go back. The woods likes to eat. And the woods will put its face down in its feed tub and just chow down, and feed's flying out the sides and it's frothing at the mouth. And that kind of enthusiastic, really sloppy eating is just called fressing. And I can remember somebody saying to a child when I was a kid at a diner who had his face right down to his plate, you fresh your food like a woods. Well, think about that as you have your dinner and try to avoid fressing like a woods. It's okay to fress a little bit if nobody's looking, but not the whole woods thing. If you're trying to figure something out, instead of saying, I wonder how that works, you might say, it wonders me how that works. And in fact, you might say, it wonders me how that works once. Because for whatever reason, they don't say twice or 3 times, but they'll just say, I don't know, should we go down there once? And there we go. Should we back her up once? Yeah, because she's Shushly again. Now, suppose you've had enough, and because you just can't take it. Well, then you're brutzing. And so if you're sad and you're crying, and particularly babies, a poor little kid, she was in there brutzing. So that's what you do in their crib, a brutzing away. And if an adult was acting childish and complaining, they might say, what's he brutzing about? Sort of like saying, well, what's that sucker crying about? But brutzing somehow just sounds a little better than crying. It's just a little more, it gets you in the gut a little bit more. Now, it's not going to rain today, but if it did, and this is actually a word that's gotten into the mainstream, if it just drizzled a little bit, it would just be spritzing. Now, that's become a word. That's a word that's all over you can get drinks and there's spritzers, and you can get little sprayers they call spritzers. But the actual origin of that, there we go, Shushly. The actual origin of that was here in Pennsylvania Dutch country amongst the Dutch who said, it's going to just make a little spritz today. But if it was going to rain, it's going to make down. That meant it was going to come down in a torrent. So, it's one thing to be out here even with the camera going if it was just spritzing. But if it makes down, I'm heading for the barn. Now, if this video really turned out well, you might say it's very good, really good, terrific if you're English. But if you were Pennsylvania Dutch, you'd say, that video, it was terrible good. Because Terrible could describe good things and bad things, because if something wasn't good, you might say, oh, it was terrible bad. But if it was good, hey, oh, it was terrible good, terrible good. So hopefully the video will be terrible good. If you just can't understand the video, if you can't understand, what we're trying to accomplish here, you might be a dumb cough. And that literally translates to a dumb head. Now, a dumb cough is nowhere near as bad as a shice cough. See, a dumb head, there might be some hope for. A shice cough, not much, because the transition is from dumb head to shithead, and that's not a good thing. So, if you must be a dumb cough, maybe you can get over it. If you're going to be a shice cough, you're probably past the point. Now, you were dreaming of getting home and having a piece of pie. And you got home and your wife and your kids had scarfed down all the pie. And you said, "Where's the pie?" Well, your wife would get a little sheepish and she'd wipe her crumbs off her face and she'd say, "The pie's all." It's all. But in the old days, if somebody said it's all, people would get so confused if they were from off, because if you weren't from around here, you were from off. People from off had no idea what somebody was talking about when they said, "Hey, the pie's all." You go into the diner and say, "Can I have some of that shoe fly pie?" "I'm sorry, the shoe fly pie, it's all. That's all gone, no hope." Then, instead of saying it's hot today, they'd add, hot today, ain't. And you'd hear that, pretty wet, ain't. They just added it on to make it more of a question. And when you turned on your power, it wasn't electricity. You'd say, "Well, we turned on the electric." Or, a lot of people, in days gone by, were slow to get power. And they'd say, "Well, I finally got electric once." And that would be a good day for them, because then they could bake more pie and it wouldn't be all anymore. Same way, growing up, somebody put something on the stove, not the oven, but on the stove. They'd say, "Hey, put those eggs on the fire once." It was always the fire. Never the stove, it was the fire. And so if you said any of these things, what you are known to be around here in Lancaster County, they'd say, he's pretty Dutchified. If you're Dutchified, you'd use those terms. If you're really Dutchified, you'd hardly speak English, you'd mostly speak Dutch. So, unfortunately, the horse behaved pretty well, but I still got to talk about local color, which is dying in our society these days. And I'd love to hear from some of you folks, what it's like in your region and how much of it you've held on to. She's rooching around, but she's not really that Shushly right now. So from time to time, you may hear these words creep into these videos because it's not hard. So till then, though, we're going to out in the microphone and out in the camera, and we'll see you the next time.